Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the podcast. It's been a while. It's Frank back with another episode. So today we have a guest that we've had before on the show. Léandre is here and back again for another episode. So do you want to say a little hi, Léandre?
Hey, guys.
So basically, we all know, if you've listened to the podcast, you know that me and Léandre met at school, but he just came back from an exchange in England. So basically, he started writing his new book there. Do you just want to talk to us about your exchange there? What were your feelings coming in? What were your feelings coming out? What was the general gist of the experience?
Yeah, so in a way, the exchange was more about the people that I've met because I changed setting, but that setting allowed me to meet new people with different perspectives. And one of the really interesting things about going on an exchange and going abroad in general is that you're an entirely different person. You just don't care about what people think of you. You're like anonymous. People won't remember you. And so and everybody I met who've been on an exchange, they all say the same thing. It's like you're a new person, and then when you come back home, you either kind of go back to your old ways or you keep some of the things that you were doing back when you were abroad. And so for me, really, the inspiration I got from being on an exchange was mainly to be like in a new house with different people, doing different things, and so that just stimulated me intellectually, and that spurred all the inspiration for the book that I've been writing this year.
So, how old are you again? 22?
22, yeah.
22, and second book in progress, so that's not something to let loose. It's very, very good, very prolific of you, and very rare at our age that people have such intellectual pursuits as writing, because it tends to be something that you need to be relatively mature for, and you need to be able to put yourself on the side and your subjectivity on the side, and to adopt the writing style that's based on you and what fits you. So basically, you talked about the environment, you talked about changing the environment in general, and on the point that you made of going abroad, I feel that a lot of people do have that experience where they change the setting and it just impacts them in a positive way, because it just changes your cultural lens a lot for a lot of the people. For you, it may not have been the same, just because England, you said, is sort of similar to here. Like, there's a couple differences, but it is a Western culture. It's not like if you went to like Zimbabwe or like Singapore. Guatemala or Singapore or something like that. But can you give us a little gist of like how you believe setting determines quality and quantity of writing? Because you did say that it does change it quite a bit.
Yeah, so I think one of the main things is to have, and I don't mean that in a strict manner, but I think if you can put some order in your room, and have your computer and like write at the same place. Obviously, I don't always write at the same place. I like to write in cafes as well, but you need to have some sort of grounds, and so like a place where you can write. And I was talking about change, but one of the beautiful things about going on an exchange is that you go and live in an entirely different place, but you still have enough time to build yourself a new routine. And there are things that I've done there more regularly than I ever did here in Montreal, like going to the gym and writing to a certain extent, because I wrote over 30,000 words in the span of like a couple of months.
So wait, can you repeat that? You wrote 30,000 words in a span of a couple months.
Yeah.
So that really is something, that's high quality and quantity, because you've already written a novel, obviously, so you do have an idea of what you're going to keep and what you're not going to keep.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting that you talk about being in a different setting but having a ritual. I find that that's very important, because you're changing cultural elements and you're changing elements of where you're used to being in, but at the same time you're changing parts of your overall process, but some parts you're keeping constant. So like having this boxed in area where you're actually able to work and to find yourself and to find your writing, it must be something very stabilizing in of itself. So basically, we're going to move on to the second part of the podcast, which is going to be a little bit longer. So we had a presentation of your trip abroad to England, the fact that having a different environment encompasses a lot of different things. It can be a culture, it can also be where you write, but generally speaking, your micro environment is what stayed constant, and the movement around you in the larger cultural lens is what permitted a more loose thought process, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna go towards the organization of thoughts. So basically, as a relatively proficient writer, what are your tricks to that our listeners can have that they can achieve consistency with? Because a lot of the time people have spurs of, I need to write something, I want to get something out there, and they just lose themselves and they're like, I'm so tired of writing, I can't achieve consistency, I don't really know where I'm going with my writing. It seems to be a lot of a consistency problem for most, and I really identify with this problem. So can you tell us how you achieve consistency in writing in general?
Yeah, so I can tell you what I've been doing for this novel that I'm writing, and certainly won't apply to everybody in every type of work. But I think the reason I've been able to write over 30,000 words in a couple of months is because I've decided, and that has to do with my specific novel, but I've decided to be very symmetrical. So I've decided paragraphs to be a certain length, to have sections of chapters that are a certain length, and chapters to be a certain length. And that really sort of constrained how you're writing, and it allows you to think more graphically. So you look your page and you're saying, okay, this is kind of symmetrical, that's where I stop, that's where I start. And so for me that was really helpful, just organizing and making a structure and a pattern for this novel. And that also made it easier to reach a certain objective, because what I did is I would try to go for 500 words a day. Sometimes it would be 750, sometimes it'd be 340, and so that would kind of compensate for days where I wrote more and wrote less. But really the organization, that really helped me. But it as I said, it has more to do with how I want to present my novel, because the form, the symmetry, it has to do with the storyline. It's a sort of political statement, like the structure. So again, it won't apply to anyone, but if you can find a structure or pattern that gives you certain constraints, I think that might help.
Interesting. So basically you're saying that you need a frame of reference to use and reuse over time, right? So basically a lot of people get into free flow writing where they're really like, okay, I'm just going to write X amount of words. And I feel that may be good at the beginning, but since you've went through that creative process already and you already have a structured novel that's published, you're at the point where you can actually you're inclined to have a structure where you can actually progress and reuse that structure.
Although that structure is very different, and I had much less structure in my first novel. I wasn't thinking that way. But now it's just I guess to facilitate the process, and also one of the things, because you wanted to talk about the organization of thoughts, my thoughts are organized in paragraphs, and given the type of novel that I'm writing, which is very much about ideas and thoughts and perceptions, the narrator's speech, it's made in a way that each paragraph is a certain amount of words, and it's an idea, and then there's another idea, and then it just goes on and on and on.
Okay.
And so for me, that makes it really easy to write, and that's what allows me to write a lot.
Okay. So basically, this novel is more of a political. There's a lot more statements of actual real world in this novel than there was in Italy Home. So,
for sure.
So basically, you're also saying that the type of writing that you do encompasses the type of writing style that you might
Yeah.
have during the writing. So
Exactly.
if you're writing something more on the creative side where it's more like, you know, a pure fantasy, you would go with more free flow writing
Exactly.
rather than it being like structured politically to reflect the current problems we have today, right?
Yeah, well, it's not really that, but what you're saying isn't invalid. It's more it sort of shows what the narrator is like in his thinking. It's very structured. It's very orderly. It's very symmetrical, and in a way that's kind of conservative, and it has to do with his philosophy and his politics, and so that's like the form content going together. And but to me it serves my purpose well because it helps me structuring my thoughts and ideas and allows me to write more.
Okay, so basically we could say that you went through a creative phase with your first book where it was more like, you know, achieving that consistent writing of a certain amount, and after that you took that raw amount and you structured it a lot more, and that's what I seem to see having conversations with you. Your thoughts seem to be a lot more structured.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the thing is, to get my book published, the first one, Hétérochrome, I went through multiple rewriting, not editing, rewriting. I rewrote the entire book because it was kind of messy. Whereas this one, having the structure and this sort of process, I don't always write as much as I wish, but I really do feel like it's of high quality. It's very, like, I reread it after, I reread a paragraph, and like I feel like it's pretty damn good. Like, it's very readable. Whereas, and it's kind of difficult, and like at the end, if you look at the draft, it's still kind of garbage because the first draft is garbage. But like,
I wouldn't be
feel
so
like,
hard on yourself.
No, but like that's what everyone agrees on. That the
Obviously,
first draft is garbage, but I would say it's not that garbage. Like first draft, that's pretty good garbage.
Pretty good garbage. Okay, so basically he's being a little hard on himself, but that's what good writers do, basically, is that they need to be objective about their writing. And the more you're aware that you might be mediocre in writing and that you're not praising yourself too much, it's an awareness that your writing is becoming more structured and that you're more aware of your flaws as a writer, I feel. So here we're going to hit a little bit of a parallel. So we talked about the type of environment that we have associating ourselves with the type of writing that we may have. Do you believe that your mood is influencing your writing? Though I do understand that this is more of a structured book where you're making statements. How hard is it to dissociate yourself with your current mood? How hard is it to dissociate yourself with the filter you're currently having? Suppose you're having a really shitty day, okay? And you really feel like writing, like, quote unquote, you know, bad stuff, like negative things. How do you dissociate yourself with the current mood you're having in achieving objective writing?
It's a good question because I don't have that many shitty days, first of all, but I guess there are two main things in what you're saying. There's like there's your current mood, like your overall mood, which is probably gonna inspiration from, like, for your book, and like that's been the case for me. And what I usually do, like my process when I write something, because there's always like a good deal of it that comes from reality, but I just extract the sort of philosophical essence of like what happens in my life and just make it something else, either like nicer or more like intriguing or whatever. And so that's sort of a reflection of my mood. Now, when I write, it's really hard to say because I can't remember one time that was feeling like shit and was trying to write. But I think it's like, I think in terms of my character, but my character is always like pretty close to what my reality is, like in terms of like the questions and the questions and the the ideas. And I feel like, I mean, okay, so maybe less than a month ago, there was some stuff going on in my life, and you know, it wasn't like, I wouldn't say it was a shitty day, but it was late at night, and I wasn't too happy about what was going on, and I just like went and wrote, and it was actually one of the most productive sessions, and like I wrote a lot of ideas, and it was like a couple of paragraphs, and it was actually pretty good because in a way what I was feeling at the moment was pretty reflective of what my character would be feeling, because there's a great deal of what he's feeling that comes from my very own thinking.
Okay.
So I guess you can use that in a productive way if you're writing something that's truthful to your reality.
So that's very interesting in that you're talking about your current state affecting the quality of your writing, but at the same time you want to achieve objectivity, right? So so you have statements where you're going to look more for objectivity, yet your cultural and lens in the moment does also contribute to your writing as a whole. So I believe what you're saying is that it's kind of a mix of both, where
Yes.
some days you're going to be able to have a more objective lens, and some days you're going to be more able to use that emotional feeling that you're having in order to be a productive writer, because there are certain parts of the novel that you're going to be writing that are more, you know, feeling based, and that there are certain types that are going to be more, you know, ideologically based or just like fact based. So I think that's very
Yeah.
interesting to see that divide between those two things.
Well, one thing is this particular novel I'm writing right now isn't really trying to achieve any sort of objectivity, and the simple reason for that is it's a novel written at the second person in the present tense, so it's talking to someone, and it's basically giving an account of something that happened, and it's as subjective can be, but at the same time it's filled with regrets and remorse, and so it's subjectivity aware of its own subjectivity,
Which is objective.
kind of. It's not always objective, because you'll see it's an amalgam of all different ideologies you can find within characters, and it's ideologies at multiple levels, whether it be politically, philosophically, individually, and so you can see all these ideologies clashing, and that's why the result is sort of non-ideological, but passages themselves, they can be quite ideological, although the guy is trying to, you know, not be that ideological person, because he's very aware of the limitations of his subjectivity and the problems of ideology.
Because he's aware of his human condition, basically, that he operates through his own subjective lens.
Yeah.
And that, if I understand this correctly, that there are multiple instances of, you know, different people on different political spectrums, for instance.
Yeah,
and that
that's right.
the whole encompasses an objective view of what is happening at the current time.
It's always through his lens, but he's acknowledging a lot of different perspectives, and is aware because of the underlying narrative, which is a failure in the relationship. So because of that, he's aware, maybe more inclined to acknowledge these perspectives, and maybe being a little less dogmatic about it.
So basically using empathy and using the understanding of other people's subjectivity to understand your own subjectivity. Okay, so that's very interesting. So now we're going to hit the last segment of the podcast. This one is going to be more like listener oriented. So what I'm trying to do now is separate it into three bits, and the last bit is where we're going to give back to the listener. So thank you very much for tuning in. We really, really appreciate your time. We appreciate the listening that you're partaking in. This experience is not only for me, it's for everybody who's willing to participate in this experiment with me and to share their time and to share their awareness and to learn during this experience. So basically, the last part is giving back to the listener. Can you give us a couple tricks that you use? You said that you had like a basic ritual before you started writing, or like a minimum amount of words that you have before you start writing. Like, do you really use that as like a limit? You have to go over 500 words, or does it gravitate? Like, how does your usual workload like pan out during a normal day, and how do you keep it consistent over a longer time, right? Coming back to the consistency aspect.
Yeah, so as I said, it depends. I try to be nice with myself. So if I do only 400 words, that's fine, because I keep in mind that sometimes I do write more than 500 words. And I don't think I have much of a ritual before writing. I mean, I like to get a good cup of coffee, but that's not really a ritual per se.
I disagree with that.
It depends. I try to write in the morning, but depending of where I am or what my life is like, oftentimes it's easier to write at night. I would say I try to write when I don't have something to do right after, like, like going to bed or like going to school, because sometimes I want to write more, I feel inspired, I don't want to feel constrained and like stop, because that really sucks.
Okay, so basically you try to clear your thought process before you go into your writing, because essentially I feel that when you write, you don't really put yourself aside, but you try to encompass a new lens, and you dive into a new world, right?
Yeah.
So having something to do right after might be a little constraining, because you don't know how much that bit of writing might be productive, like you just
it's
said,
also
right?
stressful, because you need to give yourself a bit of time to actually get into the writing, and sometimes it might be, I guess on average for me it's about 30 minutes. It's like you're warmed up. It's like at first it's difficult, it's kind of like a learning curve.
It's like going to the gym. You need to warm up before you're able to hit your working set.
But it's like, well, I'd say it's like going to the gym, but starting working out and just like it's really difficult, and and you're like
struggling.
You drop the weight.
Oh my god!
You're like, fuck, this is
shit,
and you're like cursing at other people around.
Oh, okay. So I don't do that.
That's kind of no. I'm like comparing. That's what it feels like for the first 30 minutes at times, and then after, you're like, okay, this is going well. That's like, you're doing your weighting, and like.
So it would be compared to a shitty day where you underslept or underate, and you come into your workout and you're like, okay, this is going to be probably garbage, but then you do it, and just because you're there, and just because you're doing it, and because you've done it so many times, you're able to recall that motor pattern, and you're able to recall that creative bubble where you're able to essentially alienate yourself from everything else, and work on your creative progress and get into a flow state where you're not really aware of what's happening around
you. And one of the most common advice you find in articles about writing is show up every day. Even if you're tired, even if you feel like shit, show up every day and write some fucking garbage.
I mean, even if it is garbage, it's productive garbage, You might as well get the garbage bits out before you get the prolific bits out. And you know what? Yeah. Like, a lot of very, very prolific authors, like Dostoevsky, for example, like a Russian author, they went mad writing. Like, they straight up went mad writing. They went crazy writing the bits that were the most prolific bits that they wrote. So essentially, having that spectrum of emotion is essentially a blessing in of itself, because you achieve consistency through all your frames of mind, but it's like you can find gold in the most weird lands ever. You could feel super bad and have a really, really prolific bit just like appear out of nowhere, So I find that very interesting in writing, because it's such a mix of everything around you and you trying to separate yourself from everything around you, yet everything is there when writing.
Well, that's not something I really do, trying to separate myself from the writing. I mean, the writing is very much myself, and I'm very much like the writing. And obviously that can't be for everyone. It depends on the genre. But I feel like for literary fiction, which is what I consider to be my genre, that's a good thing to do. That's like being genuine and, exploring ideas that you really do know, because those are your ideas, and they may be different from your reality, but these are like you still have the essence of what you're thinking and the questions you have and the thoughts and everything.
So, this was a very, very fun conversation to have. I feel that this is kind of the sweet spot where 25 minutes is really good as to where most listeners can stick with it, and that they don't have to see me to hear me blah for like 2 hours, even though I do love it. Yeah, it's my coffee or my beer in this case. By the way, cheers.
Cheers.
Before we leave, do you have any bits of information you would like to disseminate to the readers? Is there anything you would like to tell them? Is there any resource that they can go consult? Just like for aspiring writers out there, what can you share right now that they're gonna be able to go see right now?
Okay. Well, one thing that's been very important to me in my writing process is to realize that no matter how many articles you read about writing, because there are a bunch of them, and especially if you're on medium.com, there's a fucking bunch of blogs that publish these every day. It's like as soon as you stop reading these, it starts going a lot better, because you can read one or two from time to time, but I don't think there's any, like, you should be investing this time actually writing. And the first thing you can do is find yourself a structure that fits your narrative. Use that structure to give yourself goals. So for example, for me, I've decided I'll write about 90,000 words for this novel, and then I'll probably cut about 10%, because when you edit, you usually want to cut out about 10% of a sentence or a paragraph in a chapter, because usually there are always too many words and you don't need. And so I have my objective, and I can decide, okay, if I want to write 500 or 1,000 words per day, that will take me that amount of time to get there, and that's very encouraging. And then it's just you just write, and there are tools you can use. There's a software. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. Some people like it. I don't use it. It's called Cold Turkey.
Cold Turkey?
Yeah, basically what it does is you have to write, and if you stop for more than 3 seconds, it's going to erase everything.
No.
So you cannot stop.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a bit extreme.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And so I don't use it. I'm more like, I'm a Microsoft Word guy.
Just basic Microsoft.
Yeah,
So
I like
COLD, Turkey, TURKEY. That software apparently is going to erase everything you've written after 3 seconds. So if you're going to use for creative writing, for free flow writing, that might be good for you. If you're more into structured writing, it might be a different game in of itself. But I really, really appreciated your time being here. As always, very, very nice to have you here. And it was amazing to have this conversation. Thank you for being here. And guys, see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.